Oh, there we go. What's going on, everybody? Thank you for joining me here. Had to figure out the YouTube live here. Kyle will be joining me shortly. He's wrapping up Spartan League, but I've got a little bit of a news update that I wanted to share with you starting this week. We've had some crazy stuff going on in the news, and I just want to give you an idea what to expect with what's going on in this crazy, crazy world that we live in, particularly when it comes to investors and Hamas's attack on Israel and what Israel's um, response could warrant in the housing market. So Kyle looks like he was in here for a second, ended up getting kicked out. He'll probably be coming back in a minute here, but let's get into it without any more ado. All right, so the first article that I want to share has to do with the fact that our president is basically he's in a rough spot right now. He's got to figure out what he's going to do supporting Israel, who is an ally of America, as well as Ukraine, who we've become an ally with. So this one is from CNN Politics. Biden's promise to restore U.S. leadership tested by a fresh outbreak of war abroad. With the outbreak of war in Israel, President Joe Biden is contending with conflicts in two parts of the world at a moment of paralysis in Washington and increasing polarization over the direction of America's involvement abroad. Tricky time to be president for sure. And this is going to be a major test of his ability to corral alliances at home and abroad behind American leadership, all while dysfunction in Washington undercuts some of his authority and competing world powers jockey for influence. It's also a crazy time to be alive. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin announced Sunday that a U.S. carrier strike group is headed to the Eastern Mediterranean Sea as a deterrence posture. In his statement, Austin also said the U.S. will be rapidly providing the Israeli Defense Forces with additional equipment and resources. So right off the bat, we're already stating here we are going to have Israel's back. That's something to note that I've been looking to see. Are they going to come out and say, well, we don't really want to take a side in this, or at least publicly we don't want to. We've been public about our support of Ukraine. Like there's no wondering about that. And they came out and said, no, we are on Israel's side. We're going to be supporting them. With the war in Ukraine now well into its second year with no apparent end in sight, recent polling has shown that the American public support for supplying Ukraine with more weapons is starting to fray. A Reuters poll conducted earlier this month showed 41% of respondents agreed with the statement that Washington should provide weapons to Ukraine, down from 46%. So they're highlighting that there is 5% less support for the war going on in Ukraine than what there was previous to this. So, not here to give an opinion myself on what's going on in Ukraine. And I'll just say this too, for everybody who's listening to this and they're hoping that I take the side in this video of whatever they believe. Okay. I'm not saying what side I'm on, what side I'm not on. Before we even get into that, I think it's worth noting that the only information that we have to make decisions, if you want to pick a side in this stuff, came from somewhere else. So when you are taking a side, you are taking a side based off of information like that comes from this article. So I'm reading what's here. None of us have any idea how accurate this is. Do I know that's what the poll said? Do I know if the poll was conducted in a way that got accurate results? Do I know if that poll member was standing in a certain area where they were more likely to get a result than others? I don't. Okay. So when we are making decisions on this stuff, I think it's healthy to have a strong dose of humility and to recognize that we don't know anything other than what we're told. So when we make a decision, your decision can only be as good as the information that you're given. I tend to focus more on how this is likely to impact the economy, the financial world, the odd that we could go to war again. I tend to focus more on what the information can be used for, as opposed to if I like or I don't like the information, which is why I pull from a lot of different news sources. So getting back into this, the same strains of resistance on Capitol Hill will confront Biden if his administration pursues a new aid package for Israel, which is concerning. If you're in that position and you're trying to figure out, do we come in and support Israel? How much money are they going to need? We already have a ton of money going to support a different war resistance in Ukraine. I look at the world and all of the threats that are out there and what kind of message we're sending to our adversaries where we can't govern, when we're dysfunctional, when we don't even have a Speaker of the House. This comes from House Foreign Affairs Chairman Michael McCall on the State of the Union on CNN. So I think this is a decent point. Like, could this Hamas attack have been triggered by the fact that our own politicians look like they can't get their act together, and they think that we're less likely to figure out how to respond to this? They had to surely assume America would get involved if Israel was attacked, especially the way it was. It's pretty heinous. But who knows? Maybe that was just a coincidence. The past 3 administrations have sought to refocus American policy to Asia, hoping to challenge China's rise. So the past 3 administrations have recognized that the real threat here is China, and there are conspiracy theories, or maybe non-conspiracy theories. There are political opinions that China has maneuvered some of these pieces around in the Middle East to incite them against Israel, in the belief that we would then go get involved when they're watching us already involved in Russia and Ukraine. And the thought would be, if the U.S. is got resources and energy and troops displaced into these 2 different regions, that China could then go after Taiwan, and there'd be nothing that the U.S. could do about it. So it's something to consider, that we may be getting pulled thin in several different areas. The sudden onset of the war in Israel stood in stark contrast to the beginning of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which the U.S. warned about for months ahead of time using downgraded intelligence. Pretty good article that hits some pretty good points just about the situation that the president is in right now, and what we can expect as citizens of the country. Primarily, I mean, obviously, money's definitely not the most important thing, okay? But I am not even going to pretend to be an expert on Middle East relations. I'm not here to make a video to tell everybody what you should think about what's happening. You're all grown-ups. You can make up your own opinions about that. I would like to have a talk about what's going on over there and how that could affect where we are here. So I see some of the comments here. Facts, David, the media is so secure, it's hard to know what is true. Yeah, I think that's a good point, Steve. Like, the media is not a neutral party, and they don't even pretend to be. The media is owned by people who have a perspective that they want to share, and it's all, the different media companies are all owned by different people, and it's just wisdom to remember that when you're reading the information. Steve said, good, not rush judgment, and pray for both sides, especially the innocent kids that can't defend themselves. That is always where my heart goes. Okay. Like, you can pick a side in this war, and maybe there is good guys and bad guys. I think it's often more gray than what we think, but maybe, 70-30, there's a good guy in it. But the children on the bad guy side are still kids. The oftentimes the people that live in the country are not a proponent of what the president decided. Just think about you yourself, right? You like Trump or you don't like Trump. You like Biden or you don't like Biden. Those are 2 great. Most of the time, if you supported one of them, you didn't support the other. When you don't support the president you are upset about the decisions that they make, right? Would you want to be judged by the decision the president made if you didn't vote for them and it's not what you believe, by other countries? When you want to be punished for that? We should really give the same grace to people of other countries and not hold them responsible for what their political leaders chose. Like, it's very popular right now to hate Russia and hate Putin, but I don't think it makes any sense to hate Russian people who had nothing to do with the decisions. Same going on with what's happening in Palestine. Hamas is a terrorist group. It's fine to hold them accountable for the decision that they made, but the children that live in the region, they had nothing to do with this decision. And I think it's just wise to keep a measure of humility about that thing. Flippin' Realty Home says people assume and take sides based on what the media wants you to. Well, that just depends on what media you're watching and what they're telling you, right? I don't know that the media necessarily wants you to think anything. I think that they draw the people that want to hear the perspective that they are sharing. So moving into the next article here, we've got Putin banks on wavering support for Ukraine. So I thought this was a pretty good point here too. Like him or hate him, he's not a stupid guy. He's reading things pretty well. So in remarks Thursday at the annual meeting of the Valdai Discussion Club, a Kremlin-friendly confab on global issues, Putin predicted that Ukraine would collapse if the West turns off the tap of military aid and economic assistance. So again, I'm not a war expert, but most of the commentary I've heard has said Ukraine is slowly losing here. And the only reason they've made it as long as they have is the is the incredible amount of support that they've got financially and militarily from the U.S. government. When I say that, I mean the weapons that we're giving them. I don't believe that our military has actually been dispatched into that area. Developments in recent days to the alarm of Ukraine supporters suggest that Putin's plan may be gaining some traction. By and large, the Ukrainian economy cannot exist without external support, he said. Once you stop that, everything will be over in a week. It'll be finished. The same applies to the defense system. Imagine that supplies stop tomorrow. You will only have a week to live when the ammunition runs out. These quotes lead me to believe that Putin is looking at the situation and saying, I don't have to beat Ukraine. I just have to outlast how long the U.S. can financially support them. The Pentagon comptroller, the Department of Defense's chief financial officer, has noted that there is the option to replenish Ukraine's dwindling military supplies through what is known as presidential drawdown authority. Now, this is all coming at a time when I believe the Republicans have just ousted the Speaker of the House, which is a position that's usually needed when decisions have to be made like this. Terrible timing for the U.S. government. This, I thought, was extra relevant to what's going on right now, because it is incredibly difficult for any country to be involved in two foreign affairs situations like this, okay? Ukraine and Russia is already polarizing for our country. There's people that don't agree with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but also don't agree with the U.S.'s support in that situation. And I think that there's a good case to be made there. We've given them a lot of financial support. It's sort of like we poured a lot of money into investment that you don't want to see go into foreclosure, but do you keep throwing money at an investment when it's clearly not going to turn around? Now, that isn't necessarily a super concerning decision that has to be made right off the bat. However, now that we see what's going on with Israel, the talk is, well, shoot, if Israel goes to war with Iran or some of these neighboring countries that may be sheltering and supporting Hamas, okay, because you, me, none of us really know what's going on. We know what the news reports and what we think. That's it. And I just like to remember that. The opinions that I naturally form are a result of the information that comes my way. But it's not something that I know for a fact because I'm not there. Okay. And the other thing is, oftentimes when we form an opinion, it's based off of the type of information we got, but we usually don't get all of it. Okay. Like there's parts of it that aren't going to be presented to us. So getting as much information as you can and as big of a picture as you can is useful when you're in a situation like this one. Welcome, Kyle. Thanks for joining after Spartan League there.
Yes. Bringing some Spartan Leaguers with me.
Oh, that's awesome, man. Hello, Spartan Leaguers. Spartans. There we go. Yeah, well, if the situation of Hamas and Israel is obviously horrible, but it doesn't really affect the U.S. a whole bunch, other than there were a few Americans, I believe, that have already been killed over there. It is what could happen. Israel declaring war on a country as opposed to a terrorist group and then saying, hey, I'm going to fight. I need you to have my back, would put us in a position where now we are financially obligated to support them, as opposed to just Russia, Ukraine. And like I mentioned earlier, the China-Taiwan thing is really like the next domino that could likely fall. And it's funny because you can go from a position of financial strength to a position of financial weakness so quickly. It doesn't take that many things going wrong if they all go wrong at the same time, okay? So imagine that, like, you've got a house, you've got $50,000 of reserves, your mortgage payment is only $2,000 a month. You feel really safe in that position. And then you find out that your insurance is lapsing and it's going to be 3 times as expensive and you need to put a new roof on the house. That can happen. So you spend $15,000 to put a roof on the house at the same time that the tenant decides they're going to stop paying. So now you got a 6-month eviction and you lose $2,000 a month for those 6 months. So $12,000 plus $10,000 in legal fees. That's $22,000 plus the 15 on the roof. That's $37,000 of your $50 that's gone. Okay. And this all happens at the same time that a medical bill comes in your life, or a different property also ends up having a problem, or your tenant's watching the news and realizes like, ooh, I don't have to leave here. I'm going to make them get me an eviction. That $50,000 can disappear so quick when all of these things happen at once. It's a similar situation that I'm concerned that the U.S. could be starting to get sucked into here. And so it's not just like, oh, something bad happened in the world. That's normal. There's always something bad happening in the world. It's when all of these things that are happening in the world that are going wrong happen at the same time. So I've got one more article to share here, Kyle, and then I'll let you share the one that you showed me. And this one comes out of the Wall Street Journal, and this has got some really good stuff directly related to investors and what we need to know about how this could affect the U.S. government. If I sound different than I normally talk, guys, it's because we're trying to learn how to read information, share the screen, and talk to you all at the exact same time. It's different than normally when I just have to look at the camera and talk. So a couple talking points out of this article, which I think is worth reading. If you're someone who invested more than just real estate, this one has some really good stuff. And I thought the person who wrote it shared some pretty good insight. Markets on Monday morning reacted perfectly logical to the most serious attack on Israel in 50 years and the deaths of more than 1,000 Israelis and Palestinians. Oil prices initially rose 3% or so. Stock futures fell a bit, and gold was up about 1%, and the Treasury futures rose, which lowered yields. What matters most is the potential for the war to escalate. The most likely first step is a tightening of sanctions against Iran, which helped plan the U.S. attack. So this is what I was just mentioning earlier. It's not the attack against Israel that is going to become potentially with serious ramifications for our country. It is Israel's response to that attack. Okay, are they going to handle this just by protecting their country? Do they have a counterattack going on right now against Hamas forces on their home turf? And in order to get to them, do you have to declare war on the country where they are being held, like Iran? So if you think about the U.S. war on terror when that was going on, we went into the areas where we believed the people were. Remember where we found Osama bin Laden? He was in Afghanistan. Well, we didn't actually go to war with Afghanistan. We just went into their country, said, we're invading here and we're going to find these guys. And a lot of the Afghanis did not like that. That led to a resistance. A lot of the, I believe they were referred to as the Mujahideen, that were like sort of hated America being there. And it made our life harder as these people. It's kind of like what you see going on in law enforcement world. You're trying to do your job and the public doesn't like you. So they just make it tougher. Right. But that was different than a war with Afghanistan. There's probably a degree of those Middle Eastern countries don't really want the smoke with America. And I don't blame them. Would you, if you were them, right? You're throwing rocks and you're finding guns that are 20 years old and you're dealing with countries that have ballistic missiles and warships and drones that can, like, it's pretty impressive what the American military can do. However, they might want the smoke with Israel because most people over there hate them. So it's not unlikely for me to see a scenario where Israel goes after Hamas, which is the group that is responsible for this surprise attack. Maybe some of the people in the chat know more information than I do about it, but I the most heinous thing that I heard was that they basically like crossed the border, went to a festival or like a rave where people were partying and killed people and kidnapped people in the middle of a party like that. Like, these are not, they didn't go after the military. They just went after civilians. So imagine if, like, I don't know, some country came in through the Mexican border that was open, went to Burning Man and started mowing down Americans and killing them at Burning Man. Imagine how angry you would be. You'd be demanding that the U.S. government go to war with whoever's responsible for this. Well, if we had to go into another country to find them and that country already hated us, that's the scenario that this may have been like a poke in the eye to get the other person to punch you because what you really wanted was for them to punch you. In which case, now all these other countries say, oh, we were waiting for this. Let's all gang up and go against Israel. Israel turns around and says, well, who's got my back? America's their number one ally. Okay, so even though this doesn't seem like an act of war, it could inflate into one, or not inflate, what's the word I'm looking, ignite into one very quickly. What matters most is the potential for the war to escalate. The most likely first step is a tightening of sanctions against Iran, which helped plan the Hamas attack. This would reverse the easing of tensions with the U.S. that had helped Iran increase production by about 500,000 barrels a day over the past year. The war may also derail the improving relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel, which could have helped cap oil prices under a U.S. military deal with the kingdom. And that's what I thought was so good about this article. They're actually sharing, if these things do play out, here's how you could expect it to affect oil prices in America, which, as Kyle and I just talked about recently, the prices of gas were finally starting to go down. We were getting some good news, and it might be short-lived, unfortunately. We were hoping to be going like for several months with prices going down. Anything you want to jump in with yet, Kyle?
No, I mean, that was exactly it, right? Like, just seeing the fact that, number one, stocks are supposedly going to take a dip, right? The futures came back and we're going to be about 100 points lower because of this new war that essentially broke out. And yeah, we were all looking forward to better gas prices. And we just reported on Friday that oil prices were dropping, and they were going to continue to drop all the way through Halloween. And now it looks like they've taken a sharp curve back up, unfortunately.
Or it's likely to, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so with the Israeli public demanding retribution for the cold-blooded killing of so many of their citizens, a worst case is that Israel acts directly against Iran. In that case, oil prices could soar on the assumption that Iran would step up its harassment of tankers coming out of Iraq. For investors, insuring against a true Iran-Israel conflict is easier than usual. The things to buy. So what they're saying is, hey, normally when this happens, here's what you can expect to do. And they're saying it's pretty making those moves is falling in line with what's already working. The things to buy, oil stocks, defense stocks, and treasuries were fairly attractive anyway, as the tight oil market delivered high profits and bond yields hadn't been so high since 2007. True, expected earnings for U.S. oil companies are far higher than usual, but they're well below the peak last autumn. And even if they return to the average since 05, that would only push up the forward price to earnings multiple of the sector to its long run average. Previous Middle East conflicts have rarely disrupted markets for long, with the exception of the big oil shocks from the embargo of 1973 and the Iran-Iraq war in 1979. With the ghost of that era haunting markets in the form of central bank mistakes and inflation, it may be prudent to protect one's portfolio against the specter of an escalation of the latest war as well. A couple points to pull out of this one. Wars disrupt economies. This is one of those things that is referred to like a black swan event. You don't see it coming, but it can absolutely change your investing strategy. So when you know change is going to be coming, it's a good time to pay attention to the news. It's a good time to stay updated on what is going on, which my recommendation to everybody here would be, if you don't normally watch the news, this wouldn't be a bad time to start paying a little bit more attention and monitoring the markets. In particular, I'm watching what mortgage rates do, and I want to see what the investor appetite for mortgage-backed securities is, in addition to these wars in Ukraine, as well as the potential war in Israel. I'm also watching how consumer spending is affected, as news of wars usually spreads fear throughout the markets. And then Kyle actually has another article that he came up with today that I think is super relevant for what we have going on. Did you want to comment on anything I've said so far before you pull that up?
No, I think you bringing up mortgage rates is a great segue into what I'm going to talk about. So was on social media today, saw a post, and then I found the source. It looks like it was actually sourced to Twitter, but I haven't been able to find it in actually any news outlet. So if you go look like Google News, you're not going to find it. But this was actually a tweet put out by Lance Lambert today. And basically what it is it's a joint letter from the National Association of Home Builders, the Mortgage Bankers Association, and the National Association of Realtors, NAR. So all three of those associations have written an open letter to Jerome Powell and the Fed, basically asking them, hey, no more rate hikes, number one. And number two, please do not sell off any of your MBS holdings until and unless the housing finance market has stabilized. So I wanted to share just a couple details of what was written in this note. And then, David, we can discuss a little bit about the implications of it. But what they said was basically NBA, NAR, and the NAHB wrote this letter today to convey their profound concern shared among the collective memberships that ongoing market uncertainty about the Fed's rate path is contributing to recent interest rate hikes and volatility. This has exacerbated housing affordability and created additional disruptions for a real estate market that's already straining to adjust to a dramatic pullback in both the mortgage origination and the home sale volume. These market challenges occur amidst a historic shortage of attainable housing. They go on to talk about how mortgage rates have now reached a 23-year high, dragging application activity down to a low last seen since David and I were teenagers, 1996. The speed and magnitude of these rate increases and the resulting dislocation in our industry is painful and unprecedented in the absence of a larger economic turmoil. Then they go on to talk about the spread between the 30-year mortgage rates and the 10-year treasury yield is at historically high levels, signaling deep-seated uncertainty about where the Fed is headed. And then they go in and talk about some real-world scenarios where basically at a $300K house, $300K price of a house, $300,000, home buyers are having to pay $250 extra. Doesn't seem like a lot, especially if you're, say, from California, but $250 is actually a pretty large amount, specifically on a mortgage at that level. And then they go on to basically strongly urge the Fed to make two clear statements. Number one, that the Fed does not contemplate further rate hikes. So they're asking the Fed to come out and be straightforward with to be more certain, right? To get rid of the uncertainty. And number two, that the Fed will not sell off any of its MBS holdings until and unless the housing finance market is stabilized and mortgage to treasury spreads have normalized. So, man, talk about some pretty deep implications right here. Both from an industry perspective, right? A lot of people have been impacted, a lot of people who work in this. And you mentioned this on Friday's YouTube Live, David. It's not just realtors, it's not just mortgage lenders, it's everybody in the housing industry is absolutely impacted. And so these associations have had to get together to put out a clear letter to the Fed asking them to do something, basically pleading for them to do something.
Yeah, we live in a credit-based economy, and that is a long topic to get into. But basically, if you want to understand what I mean, it's the dollar's not backed by gold. So, like a lot of the financial transactions that take place are not, I trade a chicken egg for a tennis shoe. Like they're not based on actual tangible assets. They're based on made up, like fictional idea of value
Yeah.
that we have that's called a currency, right? And I'm not criticizing it. I'm just acknowledging that that's the reality. In order for things to continue to thrive in a credit-based economy, money has to change hands. Okay, so if I'm going to give Kyle a loan for $1,000, that's $1,000 I no longer have to spend somewhere else. That's $1,000 that comes out of the economy if Kyle just puts it in his bank. But if I give him a loan for $1,000 and he makes payments to me on that, I get some money coming back with interest that I can then put into the economy, and he gets $1,000 that he goes and puts into the economy. So that $1,000 didn't disappear. It actually turned into a little bit more money because I gave him 1,000 and he gave me money back with interest. Okay. Now, if he was just giving me the money back with interest out of the 1,000, then it wouldn't have created any more money. But he's also going to be borrowing money and using credit in other places. All right.
Yep.
The way that this whole thing is kept together is that when I go make a loan to somebody, someone's going to buy the paper from me. If I couldn't get that $1,000 back in from some way to go lend to somebody else, then I don't have the $1,000 to give to someone else, and they're not able to get the money to buy the pieces that they need for their business. All right. Nobody wants to buy debt if they think that they could get a better interest rate if they wait. The same way that if you heard, okay, the value of vehicles is going to be dropping very soon, you'd stop buying cars. You'd stretch it out as long as you could. If someone said the value of cars is going to be going up in the future, you'd be more likely to buy a car. That is why that's why they target that 2 to 3% inflation rate, because it's just enough to get you to say, no, I'll spend my money because it'll be more expensive later.
Mm-hmm.
All right. When the interest rates go up on something like a bond, the bond you have becomes worth less. Because if you have a bond with a 5% rate, but then they sell them at 8%, your 5% is harder to sell to someone else because nobody wants it. So there's an inverse relationship between what bonds are worth or treasuries or mortgage-backed securities with the rate that they have. Now, if the Mortgage Bankers Association, what they're telling Jerome Powell is, if you keep raising rates, it is going to be very difficult for us to sell the notes that we have originated for somebody and find a buyer for them. And if we cannot find a buyer for them, we cannot give more loans to people, which would lead to a credit crunch. It would lead to all the oil coming out of the car engine, and it's going to grind to a halt. That's what everyone was worried about during the too big to fail banking scandal. I mean, everyone's mad that we bailed out the banks, and I am too, but there's a reason why that very few people understand. There was a logic to why it happened, and it wasn't just protect the rich. It was more complicated. It was if the banks didn't have money to lend, then nobody could borrow money, and the whole economy would grind to a halt. That's what they were trying to avoid. So they just flooded the car with a bunch of oil. Now we have inflation. That's where the example falls apart, because it's not like oil becomes worth less when you flood it with a car. So
Yeah.
no analogy is perfect, and I can admit that. If like the Silicon Valley Bank, they took a lot of heat because they bought a lot of bonds. And then when rates went up, those bonds they bought weren't worth enough money. And ultimately, that's what led to that bank going down. Okay. The NBA is understanding if you keep raising these rates, it's harder to get people to sell the loans that were originating. People will stop buying bonds. They will stop buying treasuries. It becomes harder for the government to raise money. And here's what no one's talking about. If you got to sell bonds at 8% to pay back the ones that you sold to people at 5%, the government's debt keeps going up.
Yeah.
So again, are they going to print more money to fund these wars? Are they going to print more money to pay back the bonds that they've given to people, that the money that they owe them? Is this going to lead to even more freaking inflation because we thought that we could like kick the can down the road? I don't know, but this is what I'm watching, right? So this could become a horrible recession that leads to a depression and everyone could lose a lot, in which case don't be surprised if investors start going belly up that were normally making good moves that they just couldn't see coming. Imagine if this goes wrong and everybody stops traveling and short-term rentals start not performing. You're not able to make your payment. They either go to foreclosure or they try to sell, but nobody wants to buy the houses because they're afraid the economy is going to get worse.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's a legit thing that can happen. Or what we might see is squeeze, scary, and then the government goes, oh, we need to do something, create stimulus, and then poof, we have another huge run. Okay, I don't know which direction they're going to take, but this is what I'm watching, and I want you guys to be watching this too. This could lead to a depression. This could lead to another run up in values, but it's very hard to see this ever staying status quo. So pay attention to what's going on with Israel. See if this develops into bigger wars. Look at how the U.S. approaches this, and don't be surprised if something changes in this situation with Ukraine and Russia, and we broker some kind of an agreement, or we just pull out of the thing altogether. Kyle, any last minute thoughts you'd like to share?
Yeah, I mean, that's all really good stuff. And I think you're right. We need to be vigilant. We need to watch what's going on. I think just to kind of hit it home of how these interest rates impact the entire economy would be looking at what's going on in the actual market. I think it's easy for us to be like, well, interest rates are high, so I can't afford a house, so I'm not going to buy one. But it's not that simple. It's more nuanced than that. And so what I was talking about tonight in the Spartan League was, for example, very small example, in Sacramento, we have 2,000 less listings on the market right now than we would in a pre-COVID normal market, right? So that's 2,000 less home sales, which is about 4,000 less sets of commissions, 2,000 less home inspections, 2,000 less county transfer tax fees, city transfer tax fees, 2,000 less moving companies getting involved, right? 2,000 less escrow companies being paid, 2,000 less loans being brokered, right? And so it's not just the impact of, well, one person can't buy a house, but it's like you were talking about, it's the economy and the cycling of money. And that's where we're seeing that. And Sacramento obviously is just one tiny little market. You take that and spread it across the United States, that is a huge deficit to where we were just for a regular normal economy, which is why watching things of what's happening in the world, what's happening to the interest rates, what the Fed is doing, how we're responding to it, all of those things are connected and they all ultimately impact us.
That's right. All right. Thank you for joining me, Kyle. Thank you, Spartan Leaguers that just made it. If you guys want to learn more about Spartan League, you can go to spartanleague.com. That is the mastermind that Kyle and I run. It's really a real estate university. In a month or so here, we're going to have daily calls on different real estate related topics, as well as different speakers and experts in different financial matters. Probably not a better time than now as far as the time to join a group like this than ever because of the changes that we're seeing in the economy. Good to stay on board. All right. Give him a follow at Kyle Ranke on Instagram, Facebook, or your favorite social media. And I'm David Green 24. Have a good night.
See ya.